I've spent 15 years learning to read silence, the kind that fills Enzo Petro's office every evening after the legitimate world goes home, after the art dealers and auction house representatives shake his hand and leave through the front door, unaware that the real business begins only when their headlights disappear down the gravel drive. The kind of silence that settles over his shoulders like an old coat, familiar and heavy, as he sits alone reviewing manifests that document provenance chains stretching back centuries, each line hiding as much as it reveals. Tonight, 3 days before Christmas, that silence felt different. I stood in the doorway of the archive room, dust motes dancing in the amber glow of the desk lamp, holding a leather-bound inventory ledger from 1990. My fingers trembled slightly, not from the cold that seeped through the stone walls of this converted monastery that housed Petro antiquities, but from what I'd found on page 47, written in faded ink that had turned the color of old blood. Pearl bracelet, circa 1920s, Greek origin. 18 natural pearls, white gold clasp with sapphire detail. Personal collection, MP, not for sale. Current location, unknown. MP, Maria Petro, Enzo's mother. I closed the ledger carefully, my heart beating against my ribs with a rhythm that had nothing to do with professional curiosity, and everything to do with the man sitting alone in his office right now. The man I'd worked beside for 15 years without ever truly being beside him at all. The December wind rattled the leaded windows, carrying with it the scent of snow that hadn't yet fallen. I glanced at my watch. Nearly 8. The staff had left hours ago, eager to begin their holiday preparations. Even Alexandros, Enzo's longest-serving security consultant, had departed after receiving a curt nod of dismissal, leaving just the two of us in this labyrinth of beautiful stolen things. I should have been gone too. Should have been at my small apartment overlooking the harbor, wrapping the modest gifts I'd bought for my sister's children, preparing for the family gathering I'd attend with my usual detached politeness. Instead, I found myself walking down the corridor toward Enzo's private office, the inventory ledger pressed against my chest like a shield, or a confession. The door stood ajar, spilling warm light across the marble floor. I could see him through the gap. Dimitrios Petro, called Enzo by everyone who did business in the shadows where art met commerce met something darker. 42 years old, though his eyes carried decades more. Dark hair threaded with silver at the temples, strong features that photographs never quite captured, hands that could authenticate a Renaissance bronze with a single touch, or break a man's wrist with the same casual precision. He sat with his back to me, staring at something I couldn't see, a glass of whiskey untouched on the desk beside him. I'd learned his moods the way sailors learn weather, by watching, by surviving, by developing an instinct for when to speak, and when silence was the only safe harbor. Tonight, the set of his shoulders told me he was somewhere I couldn't follow, somewhere he went every year as Christmas approached, and the world around him filled with light and noise and the kind of joy he'd forgotten how to feel. I knocked softly on the doorframe. "I thought you'd left." His voice carried no inflection, stating fact without invitation or dismissal. Almost. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me with a quiet click that seemed to echo in the cavernous room. I was finishing the inventory audit you requested, on December 22nd. A statement, not a question, but I heard the unspoken inquiry beneath it. "Why are you still here, Gemma? Why do you always stay?" The Castellani collection requires documentation before the New Year transfer. I moved closer, the ledger still pressed against my chest. I found something interesting. He turned then, finally, his storm-gray eyes meeting mine with the kind of assessment that had made lesser people confess secrets they'd never intended to share. I'd grown immune to that gaze over the years, or perhaps I'd simply learned to hide my reactions better, to meet his intensity with my own quiet strength. Interesting. He repeated the word as though tasting it, finding it inadequate. "Show me." I crossed to his desk, hyper-aware of the space between us narrowing to nothing as I placed the ledger before him, opened to the entry I'd found. His gaze dropped to the page, and I watched his expression shift. Barely. Just a microscopic tightening around his eyes, a fractional pause in his breathing. He knew what it was. Of course he did. When did this enter the collection? His voice remained controlled, but I heard the hairline fracture beneath the surface. According to the acquisition date, March 1990, I kept my own voice steady, professional. Your father's handwriting in the notes. Enzo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His father, Christos Petrou, had built this empire on equal parts legitimate dealing and strategic acquisition of items that other collectors couldn't, or wouldn't, pursue through conventional channels. He'd died 10 years ago, leaving Enzo an inheritance of beauty and blood, of connections that stretched across continents and debts that came due in ways that didn't involve currency. Current location unknown, he read aloud, his finger tracing the faded ink, meaning my father lost track of it, or sold it without recording the transaction, or kept it somewhere separate from the main inventory. I offered the possibility gently, the way one might offer water to someone dying of thirst, carefully, aware it might be refused. Enzo leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. He picked up the whiskey glass, studied the amber liquid as though it held answers, then set it down again without drinking. My mother wore that bracelet every day, even when we had nothing, even when my father was still establishing himself and we lived in 3 rooms above a tobacco shop. She wore those pearls. She said they were her dowry, the only thing of value she'd brought to the marriage. I'd never heard him speak of his mother, not once, in 15 years. The staff whispered about her sometimes. Maria Petrou, dead at 29 when Enzo was barely 7, an aneurysm that took her in her sleep, leaving a little boy to wake beside a woman who would never wake again, leaving Christos Petrou to raise a son alone, to harden that boy into something that could survive the world they inhabited. She died wearing it, Enzo continued, his gaze distant now, focused on something I couldn't see. I remember my father removing it from her wrist at the funeral home. I was too young to understand permanence, kept asking when she'd come back for her pearls. A bitter smile touched his lips. He told me he'd keep them safe until she did. The vulnerability in his voice made something crack open in my chest. A dam I'd built over 15 years of professional distance, of convincing myself that what I felt for this complicated, dangerous man was merely loyalty, merely respect, merely the attachment anyone might develop to a person they'd served faithfully through scandal and triumph alike. I'd been lying to myself. I can find it. The words emerged before I could consider their wisdom. The bracelet. If it still exists, if your father kept any record of where it went, I can trace it. Enzo's focus snapped back to me, sharp and assessing. The trail is 35 years old, Gemma. Even if my father didn't sell it, even if it's sitting in some private collection. I know the collectors. I interrupted him, something I rarely did. I know the dealers, the auction houses, the antiquarians who specialize in estate pieces. I've spent 15 years building those relationships for you. Let me use them. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Why? The question hung between us, deceptively simple, impossibly complex. Why would I spend my Christmas holiday chasing a ghost? Why would I exhaust favors and goodwill on something that might not even exist? Why did I care about returning a dead woman's jewelry to a man who'd learned long ago not to need anything he couldn't control? I met his gaze steadily. Because in 15 years, you've never told me how your mother died. You've never mentioned her name. You've never shown me a photograph or shared a memory. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. because I think that bracelet is the only piece of her you have left, and you deserve to have it back." Something shifted in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. For just a moment, the armor he wore so naturally slipped, revealing the 7-year-old boy who'd woken beside his dead mother, who'd been taught that love was weakness and sentiment, a luxury he couldn't afford. "You have 4 days until the holiday shutdown," he said finally. "If you can find it in 4 days, do it." "But Gemma—" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that preceded every serious command he'd ever given me. "If you can't, I don't want to know you tried. I don't want to report on dead ends and false leads. Either you find it, or we never speak of this again." I nodded, understanding the real message beneath his words. Don't give me hope and then take it away. Don't make me feel this loss if you can't fix it. "I'll find it," I said, with a certainty I didn't entirely feel. His lips quirked into something that might have been a smile on anyone else. My Gemma. Always so sure. My Gemma. The possessive had slipped out unconsciously, the way such things did when his careful control wavered. He didn't correct himself, didn't acknowledge the slip, but I felt it settle between us like a promise neither of us was ready to make. I left his office with the ledger under my arm, and a mission that felt less like work and more like pilgrimage. The night air bit at my cheeks as I walked to my car, but I barely noticed the cold. My mind was already racing through possibilities, through the mental map I'd built of the art world's hidden networks, through every conversation I'd ever had with dealers who trafficked in items that came without questions and left without paperwork. 4 days. 4 days to accomplish what should take months, maybe years. 4 days to give Enzo Petro something he'd stopped believing he could have, a piece of the past that hadn't been destroyed by time or loss, or the brutal education his father had provided in surviving without softness. I unlocked my car and sat in the driver's seat, not yet starting the engine, staring at the converted monastery that housed both Petro antiquities and the man who'd become the axis around which my life revolved. Warm light glowed in his office window, and I imagined him still sitting there, staring at that ledger entry, remembering a mother who'd loved him before the world taught him that love was something to be guarded against. In 15 years, I'd never failed him. Not once. I'd tracked down impossible acquisitions, negotiated with people who communicated primarily in threats, maintained perfect discretion about transactions that existed only in whispered agreements and unmarked envelopes of cash. But this felt different. This wasn't about business or professional excellence. This was about understanding that Enzo Petro, the man everyone feared, the man who'd built an empire on being untouchable, carried inside him a wound that had never healed, shaped like 18 pearls on a white gold chain, and I was going to find them. Not because he'd ordered me to, not because my job depended on it, but because somewhere in the past 15 years of watching him, of learning his moods and his silences, of being the only person he trusted enough to leave alone in his sanctuary, I'd fallen in love with him. The realization should have shocked me. Instead, it felt like something I'd always known and simply refused to acknowledge. The way you ignore a chronic ache until the day you wake up and realize it's been shaping every movement you make. I started the car and pulled out of the parking area, my phone already connecting to my Bluetooth, my mind already sorting through the list of contacts I'd need to call. Paraskevi Vasiliou, the antiquarian in Athens who owed me 3 favors. Mikhail Christodoulou, the estate appraiser in London who specialized in Greek pieces. The auction house representatives who'd learned that I paid well for information and never revealed my sources. The city lights blurred past my windows as I drove toward home, toward my laptop and my files, and the network I'd spent 15 years building for exactly this purpose, though I'd never imagined I'd use it for something this personal, this important. 4 days until Christmas. 4 days to find 18 pearls that had been missing for 35 years. 4 days to give Enzo Petro a miracle he'd stopped believing in. I smiled in the darkness of my car, that peculiar smile that came when accepting an impossible challenge. After all, I'd spent 15 years making the impossible look easy for him. What was one more miracle between us? The snow began to fall as I reached my apartment building, soft white flakes that melted on the windshield before the wipers could sweep them away. I tilted my head back against the headrest, watching them dance in the glow of the streetlights, and made a silent promise to the memory of a woman I'd never met, a woman who died too young and left her son to navigate a world without gentleness. I'll bring them back to him, Maria. I'll give him this piece of you, this proof that he was loved before he learned to be unlovable. And then, perhaps, I'd find the courage to tell him that he was still worthy of being loved. By me, by someone who'd seen every dark corner of his empire and chosen to stay anyway, not out of fear or obligation, but out of something that had been growing quietly in my heart for longer than I wanted to admit. The snow fell faster, covering the city in white promise, and I gathered my resolve around me like armor. Tomorrow, the search would begin in earnest. Tonight, I allowed myself one more moment of watching his office light glow in the distance, of imagining the expression on his face when I placed his mother's bracelet in his hands on Christmas Eve. That image, Enzo Petro, the untouchable, the feared, the man who'd forgotten how to need anything, undone by a simple gift of pearls and love. That image would sustain me through whatever came next. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by 15 years of carefully maintained contact lists, auction catalogs, and handwritten notes from 1,000 conversations that had seemed routine at the time, but now felt like breadcrumbs leading to this moment. My laptop glowed in the pre-dawn darkness, browser tabs multiplying as I traced the history of Greek estate jewelry through databases that most people didn't know existed. The coffee maker hissed and sputtered, filling my small apartment with the bitter aroma that had become my constant companion during late-night research sessions. I'd lost count of how many cups I'd consumed, but my hands remained steady as I typed another search query, narrowed another date range, followed another thread that might lead nowhere, or might lead to everything. By the time weak December sunlight filtered through my curtains, I had a list of 7 potential leads. Not good odds, but better than I'd hoped after 35 years of cold trail. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Paraskevi Vasiliou, the Athens antiquarian, returning my message from the middle of the night when desperation had overcome my usual sense of appropriate timing. Gemma. Her voice carried the distinctive rasp of a lifetime smoker, warm despite the hour. You're chasing ghosts on Christmas week. This must be important. I cradled the phone between my shoulder and ear, fingers still flying across the keyboard. Greek pearls, circa 1920s, 18-strand bracelet with white gold and sapphire clasp. It disappeared from a private collection in 1990, possibly sold through estate channels. Paraskevi was silent for a moment, and I could picture her in her cluttered shop in the Plaka district, surrounded by icons and jewelry, and the accumulated treasures of a dozen generations. That's very specific, even for you. Whose collection? Does it matter? I kept my voice light, casual, though we both knew that in our world, provenance was everything, and discretion was currency. She laughed, a sound like gravel shifting. It matters if I'm going to call in favors on December 23rd, my dear, but I assume you have your reasons for not telling me. A pause, the click of a lighter, the exhale of smoke. Give me until this afternoon. I know someone who might remember. 3 hours later, I was on a call with Michel Christodoulou in London, explaining the same request with the same careful omission of whose bracelet I sought. Petru. He said the name with the kind of recognition that made my stomach clench. This is about Christos Petro's estate, isn't it? The pieces that never made it to auction? I should have expected this. Mikhail specialized in Greek acquisitions, and the Petro name carried weight in circles that dealt with objects of ambiguous ownership. I'm not at liberty to discuss. Save it, Gemma. His voice softened. I knew Christos. Not well, but enough to know he kept certain things separate. Things that mattered to him personally. Is this for the son? The question caught me off guard with its gentleness, its understanding that this wasn't about business. I found myself answering honestly. Yes. Good. The simple approval in his voice made my throat tighten. Christos was a hard man, but he loved that boy. If there's something that connects them. He trailed off, then cleared his throat. There was a private sale in 1992, very quiet, handled through an intermediary. Greek jewelry lot, estate pieces, no catalog listing. I didn't handle it personally, but I remember because the buyer was unusual, a collector who specialized in pearl jewelry specifically, no interest in anything else. My pulse quickened. Do you have a name? Better. I have a phone number, if it's still good after all these years. By noon, I had 5 confirmed leads and 2 possibles, each requiring its own delicate approach, its own careful negotiation. The pearl collector in London had died in 2008, but his estate had been liquidated through a small auction house in Brighton. The proprietor remembered the jewelry, unusual pieces, very fine quality, but couldn't recall specific items without checking storage. It'll take me a day or 2 to pull those records, he'd said apologetically. We're short-staffed for the holidays. I'll pay for overtime. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, exhaustion and urgency stripping away my usual diplomatic polish. Whatever it costs. I could hear the shift in his tone, the recognition that this wasn't a casual inquiry. You're serious about this? More than you can imagine. We settled on a price that made me wince. My Christmas bonus, essentially, going to bribe a clerk into working through December 23rd. But I transferred the funds without hesitation. Money could be replaced. This opportunity might not come again. My phone rang constantly throughout the day. Dealers returning calls, collectors offering information in exchange for future considerations. Auction house staff checking records that should have been digitized years ago but still languished in filing cabinets in basement archives. I barely noticed the day passing, barely registered hunger or cold, or the way my eyes burned from staring at screens. I was hunting now, following a scent that grew stronger with each call, each connection, each piece of information that brought me closer to those 18 pearls. At 4 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unlisted number. Found something. Can you come to the shop? PV Paraskivi. I grabbed my coat and was out the door in seconds, my heart hammering against my ribs. Athens was a 7-hour flight away, but Paraskivi had family in the city, a nephew who dealt in Byzantine art, operating out of a converted warehouse near the docks. The neighborhood looked exactly as I remembered from my last visit 3 years ago. Industrial, slightly threatening, the kind of place where people minded their own business and didn't ask questions about what came and went through unmarked doors. Paraskivi's nephew, Andreas, buzzed me through without a word, gesturing to the back office where his aunt sat, surrounded by inventory ledgers that predated computers. Gemma. Paraskivi rose to embrace me, her thin frame deceptively strong, smelling of tobacco and rosewater. You look terrible. When did you last sleep? I'll sleep after Christmas. I returned the embrace, then pulled back to study her face. What did you find? She gestured to an open ledger on her desk, similar to the one I'd found in Enzo's archives. A friend of mine in Thessaloniki remembered a transaction in the early 90s. Private sale, Greek family jewelry, including a pearl bracelet matching your description. The buyer was a dealer named Stavros Michaelis. The name meant nothing to me. Is he still active? Paraskivi's expression shifted, becoming careful. He died in 1998 car accident, but his inventory was purchased en masse by another dealer, someone you know, someone who would have records. She didn't need to say the name. I could see it in her eyes, in the way she hesitated before continuing. Christos Petrou bought Stavros's inventory? In 1999, yes, which means the bracelet came back to him. I finished, my mind racing. He bought it back, or he bought the lot without knowing it was in there. Either way, Paraskevi said gently, it should have been in his estate when he died. Which means your employer already has it, or his father sold it again before he died, and the paperwork was never updated. I pressed my fingers to my temples, feeling a headache blooming behind my eyes. Or it's in storage somewhere, forgotten. Paraskevi studied me with those sharp eyes that had assessed thousands of objects and could read people just as accurately. This matters to you, not just professionally. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. It matters to him, which means it matters to me. She nodded slowly, understanding passing between us without further words. In our world, loyalty was rare and precious, worth noting when it appeared. The Petrou estate storage facility, the one Christos maintained separately from the main inventory. Do you have access? I did. Enzo had given me the codes 2 years ago, trusting me with the keys to every locked door in his empire, literal and metaphorical. I'd never had cause to visit the facility, a climate-controlled warehouse on the outskirts of the city where Christos had stored items too valuable, too sensitive, or too personal to keep at the main gallery. I'll go tonight. I pulled out my phone, already calculating drive time, entry protocols. Thank you, Paraskevi. I owe you for this. You owe me nothing. She waved away my gratitude. But Gemma, be careful. Men like Dimitrios Petrou, they don't show vulnerability easily. If you succeed in this, if you return something he thought was lost forever, you'll see a side of him that even you haven't witnessed. Make sure you're ready for that. Her warning settled over me like a shawl, warm and uncomfortable. I'd spent 15 years maintaining professional distance, convincing myself that my feelings for Enzo were manageable, controllable, safely contained within the boundaries of our working relationship. But if I gave him this gift, if I cracked open the armor he'd worn since childhood, and showed him that he was still capable of being moved, of needing, of feeling loss and love in equal measure, there would be no going back, for either of us. I'm ready, I lied, and Paraskevi's knowing smile told me she heard the falsehood, but chose not to challenge it. The storage facility was 40 minutes outside the city, a nondescript metal building with security that would make a bank nervous. I pulled up to the gate just after 8 p.m., the darkness absolute beyond the ring of sodium lights, snow beginning to fall in earnest now, coating everything in white silence. I entered the access code, watched the gate slide open with a mechanical groan, and drove through to park before the main entrance. The building loomed before me, all sharp angles and shadows, keeping its secrets well. My hands shook slightly as I unlocked the main door. From cold, I told myself, though I knew it was more than that. This felt like transgression, like stepping into Enzo's private grief, into the parts of his history he'd locked away for good reason. But he'd given me the codes. He'd trusted me with this access. And I was here at his implicit permission, searching for something he wanted back, even if he'd never quite said so. The interior was organized with the same meticulous precision that characterized everything Enzo touched. Row after row of climate-controlled storage units, each labeled with a code that corresponded to acquisition dates and provenance documentation. I consulted the ledger notes I'd photographed earlier, tracing Christos's inventory purchases from 1999. Unit 47C. Estate purchase from Stavros Michaelis. The lock opened with a soft click, and I pulled the door wide, reaching for the light switch inside. Fluorescent tubes flickered to life, illuminating stacked boxes and wrapped items, all carefully preserved against time and decay. I started methodically, checking labels, opening containers, my heart rate increasing with each negative result. Jewelry boxes, icon paintings, Byzantine metalwork, Ottoman ceramics. Valuable, all of it, but none of it what I sought. At the back of the unit, almost hidden behind a wrapped canvas, I found a leather case I'd nearly missed, unmarked, unassuming. My fingers trembled as I lifted it free, set it on the floor, unlatched the brass closure. Inside, nestled in faded velvet that had once been midnight blue, lay 18 pearls on a white gold chain, the sapphire clasp catching the harsh fluorescent light and transforming it into something beautiful, something precious. I lifted the bracelet carefully, feeling the weight of it in my palm. Not heavy, but significant in ways that had nothing to do with gold and gems. Each pearl was perfectly matched, glowing with that particular luster that only natural pearls possessed, warm even after decades in darkness. This had touched Maria Petro's skin, had circled her wrist as she moved through her days, as she held her son, as she lived the life that had been cut too short. This had been removed from her cooling body by a grieving husband who'd promised to keep it safe until she came back for it. And now I would return it to her son, this piece of her that had survived when nothing else had. I closed the case gently, cradling it against my chest as I secured the storage unit and made my way back to my car. Snow fell steadily now, covering my windshield, muffling the world in white peace. I sat in the driver's seat, not yet starting the engine, staring at the leather case in my hands. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve. Tomorrow I would give Enzo Petro a gift he'd stopped believing possible. And tomorrow, everything between us would change. I was ready for that now. Ready to step out of the shadows where I'd hidden my feelings for 15 years. Ready to show him that he wasn't alone in his fortress of beautiful things. That someone saw him clearly and chose to stay not out of fear or obligation, but out of love. My phone buzzed. A text from Enzo. "Did you find it?" I stared at those 4 words, understanding what they really asked. Did you find my mother? Did you find proof that I was loved before I learned to be unlovable? Did you find the piece of my childhood that might make me whole? My fingers flew over the screen. Yes, I'll see you tomorrow night. His response came immediately. My office, 8 p.m. Just us. Just us. No witnesses to whatever would unfold when I placed his mother's bracelet in his hands. No audience to watch the armor crack, the walls come down, the man emerge from behind the legend. I started the car and drove home through the snowfall, the leather case secure in my bag, my heart already preparing for what tomorrow would bring. 15 years I'd waited. One more day felt both impossibly long and terrifyingly short. Christmas Eve arrived with the kind of crystalline cold that made the city look carved from ice and diamond. I woke before dawn, not from alarm, but from anticipation coiling in my chest like a living thing, making sleep impossible. The bracelet sat on my nightstand in its leather case, and I touched it gently before rising. A talisman, a promise, a gift that would change everything. I spent the day in a strange fog of normalcy, layered over extraordinary purpose. My sister called to confirm tonight's family dinner, which I'd have to miss, inventing an excuse about last-minute work that wasn't entirely a lie. I wrapped the presents I'd bought weeks ago with hands that felt disconnected from my body, going through motions while my mind raced ahead to 8 p.m. to Enzo's office, to the moment I'd been building toward for 4 days that felt like a lifetime. At 3 p.m., my phone rang. Enzo. Gemma. His voice carried its usual controlled cadence, but I'd learned to hear beneath the surface, to detect the microscopic variations that betrayed deeper currents. I've been thinking about tonight. My heart stuttered. Having second thoughts? Always. The admission surprised me with its honesty. But I want to know, whatever you found, whether it's what I hoped or confirmation that it's truly lost, I need to know. I understood what he wasn't saying. The not knowing had been eating at him since I'd left his office 3 nights ago, the possibility dangling just out of reach, hope being the cruelest torture for a man who'd trained himself not to hope for anything he couldn't control. 8 o'clock, I confirmed softly. I'll be there. After we disconnected, I sat for a long moment holding the phone, tracing the pattern of our 15-year dance, advancing and retreating, revealing and concealing, building a partnership that went deeper than employment, but had never crossed certain lines, never acknowledged what simmered beneath every professional interaction. Tonight, those lines would blur, perhaps disappear entirely. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy dress that was elegant without being provocative, professional without being cold. The bracelet's case fit easily in my leather bag, and I checked it 3 times before leaving, irrationally afraid it might disappear if I didn't maintain constant vigilance. The drive to Petro Antiquities felt both too long and too short, my hands steady on the wheel despite the adrenaline making my pulse race. The converted monastery rose against the darkening sky, most of its windows dark, but Enzo's office glowing with warm light, a beacon in the winter night. I parked in my usual spot and sat for a moment, gathering my courage. This was it. After this, nothing would be the same. Either I'd given him something precious and irreplaceable, or I'd be just another person who'd tried to heal a wound that couldn't be healed. The front door was unlocked, which meant Enzo was expecting me, had probably been watching for my arrival. I walked through the familiar corridors, past display cases filled with treasures from a dozen civilizations, past the archive room where this journey had begun 4 nights ago. His office door stood open. He sat at his desk, not working, not reading, just sitting in stillness that radiated tension. He'd changed from his usual suit into dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. And somehow, this casual version of him felt more dangerous than his business armor. More real. More vulnerable. He looked up as I entered, and the expression on his face, hope warring with the fear of disappointment, need fighting against the lifetime habit of not needing anything, made my chest ache. Gemma. My name, just my name, but it carried weight, carried question, carried the accumulated pressure of 35 years of loss. I closed the door behind me, set my bag on the chair, and drew out the leather case. I didn't speak, couldn't speak past the emotion closing my throat. I simply crossed to his desk and placed the case before him. Enzo stared at it for a long moment, his hands flat on the desk as though afraid to touch it, afraid that touching it would make it disappear. Is it? Open it. My voice emerged rougher than intended. See for yourself. His fingers trembled. Dimitrios Petro, who never trembled, whose hands were steady when authenticating million-dollar acquisitions or negotiating with people who communicated primarily in threats. His fingers shook as he unlatched the brass closure and lifted the lid. The pearls gleamed against the faded velvet, 18 perfect spheres that had once circled his mother's wrist, that had survived decades of separation and storage and the chaos of estate sales, that had found their way back to him through chance and persistence, and my desperate determination to give him this piece of his past. He made a sound, small, broken, entirely involuntary, and lifted the bracelet with a gentleness I'd never seen from him, cradling it in his palm as though it were made of spider silk and morning dew. Maria. He whispered his mother's name for what I suspected was the first time in decades, his voice breaking on the syllables. God, it's really hers. I watched his face, cataloging every micro-expression, the way his eyes filled with tears he didn't let fall, the way his jaw worked as he fought for control, the way his thumb traced the sapphire clasp with a reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. Where did you find it? He looked up at me, and the vulnerability in his gaze was so raw, so undefended, that I had to look away briefly to maintain my own composure. Storage Unit 47C. I kept my voice steady, professional, an anchor for both of us. Your father bought back Stavros Michaelis' estate inventory in 1999. The bracelet was in that lot. I don't think he knew. The records weren't detailed enough. It's been sitting there for 26 years. Enzo absorbed this information, nodding slowly. So he never sold it. He bought it back without knowing. Something flickered in his expression, pain or relief, or some combination of both. He kept his promise to her. In his way, he kept it safe until she came back for it, I said softly, remembering what Enzo had told me about his father's words. And now it's returned to you. He set the bracelet down carefully, as though afraid his touch might damage it, and stood. For a moment, he just looked at me. Really looked. His gray eyes seeing past the assistant, past the professional facade, straight through to the woman who'd spent 4 days chasing ghosts because she couldn't bear to see him grieve for something that might still exist. How did you know? His voice was quiet, intense. How did you know this mattered? Because I've spent 15 years watching you, I answered, the truth spilling out before I could censor it. Because every Christmas you close yourself in this office and refuse celebrations. Because you never speak of her, never acknowledge the loss, as though silence might make it hurt less. I stepped closer, drawn by gravity I'd been resisting for too long. Because I see you, Enzo. Not the reputation, not the empire, not the armor. I see the man underneath, the one who lost his mother when he was 7 and never quite learned how to fill that absence. His expression shifted through emotions too quickly to name. Surprise, recognition. Something that might have been fear. Something else that looked dangerously close to hope. Gemma, what are you saying? I'm saying that I didn't do this for my job, or for professional loyalty, or because you pay me well. The words tumbled out now, unstoppable. 15 years of careful discretion crumbling. I did it because I love you. Because I've loved you for longer than I want to admit. And seeing you grieve for something I might be able to find. I couldn't not try. The silence that followed my confession felt enormous, pressing against my ears like deep water. Enzo stared at me, his face unreadable, and I felt panic beginning to claw at my throat. I'd miscalculated, had misread the situation, had confused professional intimacy for something deeper. He crossed the space between us in 2 strides and kissed me. Not gently, not tentatively, but with 15 years of denied need and unspoken longing, his hands framing my face as though I were precious, as though I might disappear if he didn't hold on. I made a small sound of surprise that transformed into something else as I melted into him, my hands finding their way to his shoulders, then his hair, anchoring us together. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. Gemma, he breathed, my name a prayer and a curse and a benediction. I don't deserve you. That's not your decision to make. I touched his face, feeling the slight rasp of stubble against my palm. I chose this. I chose you, knowing exactly who you are. His eyes opened, storm gray and full of wonder. How long? How long have I loved you? I smiled, a bit shaky but genuine. I'm not sure I can pinpoint the exact moment. It happened gradually, I think. One day I realized I'd stopped measuring my life in calendar years and started measuring it in moments with you. He kissed me again, softer this time, with a tenderness that made my chest ache. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I convinced myself that keeping you at arm's length was protection. For you, from the uglier aspects of my life. From me. His hands settled at my waist, solid and sure. But you've been in the center of everything all along, haven't you? You've seen the worst of what I am, and stayed anyway. I stayed because of what you are, I corrected gently. Not despite it. You're not the monster you've convinced yourself to be, Enzo. No? He pulled back slightly, studying my face. I've done things that would horrify you if you knew the details. Made choices that prioritize profit over morality. Worked with people whose hands are stained with blood. I know. The simple acknowledgement seemed to surprise him. I've worked beside you for 15 years, remember? I'm not naive about what this empire requires, what compromises you've made. But I've also seen you authenticate artifacts with reverence, seen you return pieces to families who'd lost them in wars and upheavals, seen you fund scholarships for students who'd never afford university otherwise. I traced the line of his jaw. You're not just one thing, Dimitrios. None of us are. He closed his eyes at the sound of his full name, rarely used, carrying weight. When he opened them again, something had shifted in his expression. A decision made, a barrier lowered. I want you in every part of my life. He spoke with quiet intensity. Not just as my assistant, not just as the woman who keeps my professional world running. I want you as my partner in all of this. He gestured broadly, encompassing the office, the business, the complicated empire he'd inherited and expanded. If you'll have me, if you're willing to step out of the shadows and stand beside me. As what? I needed to hear him say it, needed the clarity of definition. As everything. His hands tightened on my waist. As my right hand in business, as my... He hesitated, vulnerability flickering across his features. I've never done this before. Never wanted anyone close enough to matter. But you've been close for 15 years, and I've been lying to myself about what that means. I waited, giving him space to find the words, watching him navigate emotional territory he'd avoided his entire adult life. I want you as mine, he said finally, simply. In every way that matters, publicly and privately. As my partner, my confidant, my... He stopped, shook his head with a self-deprecating smile. I don't have the vocabulary for this. I'm better with artifacts than emotions. You're doing fine. I kissed him gently, a reassurance, a promise. Better than fine. The bracelet, he said suddenly, drawing back to look at it still resting on his desk, glowing softly in the lamplight. My mother's bracelet. You gave me back something I thought was lost forever. He turned back to me, his eyes suspiciously bright. You gave me permission to remember her without pain, to hold something she touched and not feel only absence. She loved you, I said softly, and she'd want you to be happy, to find love again, to let someone close enough to care. You think so? The question carried the weight of a 7-year-old boy asking if his mother would approve. I know so. I took his hands in mine. Because love recognizes love. And what I feel for you, what you're beginning to acknowledge you feel for me, she would have celebrated that. He pulled me close again, burying his face in my hair, and I felt the tremor run through him, the release of decades of controlled emotion. Thank you, he whispered, for finding it, for finding me. We stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other, the bracelet resting nearby like a blessing, like permission from the past to embrace the future. Finally, Enzo drew back, wiping his eyes unselfconsciously. I have something for you. He moved to his desk drawer, withdrawing a small velvet box I recognized immediately. Jewelry box from Cartier, the kind that held serious declarations. Enzo, you didn't need to open it. He pressed the box into my hands, his expression nervous in a way I'd never seen. Please. Inside, nestled on white satin, lay a ring, Art Deco design, sapphire surrounded by diamonds, elegant and timeless. I bought this 3 years ago, he admitted quietly. After you negotiated the Castellani acquisition, talked that family into trusting us with their grandmother's collection. You were magnificent, fierce and compassionate, and absolutely brilliant. He touched my face gently. I bought this ring and told myself it was just appreciation, just acknowledgement of excellent work. But I've carried it with me ever since, waiting for the courage to admit what it really meant. What does it mean? My voice emerged barely above a whisper. It means I want you as mine forever, Gemma. Not just in business partnership, but in everything. Marriage, if you'll have me. A life built together, not just a professional relationship with benefits. He took the ring from the box, held it between us. I know I'm difficult, that my world is complicated and sometimes dark, but with you beside me, I think I could be better. Could build something that honors both what my father left me and what my mother would have wanted for me. I looked at the ring, then at his face. This complicated, brilliant, damaged man who'd spent 15 years learning to trust me and 35 years learning not to trust anyone. Who'd built an empire on being untouchable, but was offering me his heart with trembling hands. Yes. The word came easily, without hesitation. Yes to all of it. He slipped the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been made for me. Perhaps it had been. 3 years of carrying it like a promise he wasn't ready to make, until I gave him his mother's bracelet and showed him that love could survive loss, could bridge decades, could be found even in the most unlikely places. We kissed again, sealing the promise. And when we finally pulled apart, the pearls on his desk seemed to glow brighter, as though Maria Petro approved of her son's choice, approved of the woman who'd returned her memory and claimed his future in the same gesture. Come home with me, Enzo murmured against my lips. Tonight. Every night after this. I thought you'd never ask. We left the office together as snow began to fall in earnest, transforming the city into something magical, something new. Enzo drove his Aston Martin with one hand, the other never leaving mine, as though he needed the constant connection to believe this was real, that I wouldn't disappear if he let go. His penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a converted warehouse overlooking the harbor. I'd been here before for meetings, for dinner parties with collectors and clients, but never like this. Never as the woman who wore his ring, who'd earned the right to see beyond the public spaces into the private sanctuary he'd built for himself. I should warn you, he said as the elevator climbed toward his floor. It's not what you'd expect. Not what most people expect. I turned to look at him, noting the nervousness in his posture. What do you mean? The elevator doors opened directly into his living space, and I understood immediately what he'd meant. Instead of the sleek minimalism I'd anticipated, the penthouse was filled with warmth. Rich colors, comfortable furniture, shelves lined with books that showed signs of being read repeatedly. Photographs dotted the walls, including several of a young woman with kind eyes, who could only be Maria. I keep the cold aesthetic for the office, Enzo explained, watching my reaction. But here, this is where I let myself remember, where I keep the things that matter. I moved through the space slowly, taking it in, the worn leather armchair positioned to face the floor-to-ceiling windows. The chess set with a game in progress, the collection of Greek folk art that had nothing to do with monetary value and everything to do with beauty. It's perfect, I said softly, meaning it. It's you. He came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. I want to show you something. He led me to a room I'd never entered during previous visits, unlocking it with a key he wore on a chain around his neck. Inside was a personal museum of sorts, items that clearly held deep meaning, but had never been for sale, never been part of the public inventory. Maria's things occupied one wall, not just the bracelet which Enzo had brought with him, but photographs, A wedding dress preserved in archival tissue, handwritten letters, a child's drawing of stick figures labeled Mama and Dimitri in careful letters. I couldn't bear to look at these for years, Enzo admitted, his voice rough. After she died, my father packed everything away, said dwelling on loss was weakness, that I needed to become strong, to survive. So I learned not to think about her, not to miss her, not to need the comfort of her memory. He touched the wedding dress gently. But when he died and I found all of this, I realized I'd lost her twice. Once to death, once to enforced forgetting. I threaded my fingers through his, a silent anchor. But you kept it all. You created this space. A shrine, he said with a bitter smile. A place to keep grief contained so it wouldn't bleed into the rest of my life. He turned to face me. But grief isn't meant to be contained, is it? It's meant to be felt, processed, integrated. You've shown me that. I showed you? I questioned gently. The bracelet. You could have just told me you'd found it, could have arranged a simple transfer. But you understood that returning it meant something more than a transaction. He cupped my face in his hands. You understood that I needed to feel this, to let the loss matter, to acknowledge that she mattered. She did matter, I agreed, and so does her son. We stood in that room for a long time, surrounded by the artifacts of a life cut too short, and I felt something shift between us. Not just romance, not just partnership, but a deeper understanding. I was being trusted with his most profound vulnerability, being shown the parts of himself he'd hidden even from himself. I want to do something, Enzo said suddenly. The bracelet. I don't want to lock it away, not anymore. What do you want to do with it? He was quiet for a moment, thinking. There's a children's hospital foundation I support, one that funds research into neurological conditions like the aneurysm that killed her. I want to create a permanent endowment in her name, and I want the bracelet to be part of it, on display, with her story, so that her memory does some good in the world. The generosity of the gesture, the wisdom of transforming personal loss into public benefit, made my chest ache. She would have loved that. You think? The question carried such hope, such need for affirmation. I know. I pulled him close. She would have been so proud of the man you've become, the man you're still becoming. We spent Christmas Eve together, not celebrating in the traditional sense, but rather creating our own tradition, cooking dinner side by side in his beautiful kitchen, talking about everything and nothing, making love with a tenderness that surprised us both, falling asleep tangled together as snow continued to fall outside. I woke on Christmas morning to find Enzo already awake, propped on one elbow, watching me with an expression of wonder. What? I asked, self-conscious suddenly. I'm just trying to remember the last time I was happy on Christmas, he admitted. Really happy, not just going through motions or drinking until I didn't care anymore. I touched his face, feeling the slight rasp of morning stubble. And? I was 6. The last Christmas she was alive. His eyes grew distant. She made kourabidis, traditional Greek cookies, and we stayed up late singing carols in Greek. My father complained that we were being too loud, but he was smiling. I remember thinking that this would last forever, that nothing could touch us. I'm sorry you lost that, I said softly. I found it again. He kissed me gently. Different, but real, with you. We spent the day creating new memories, opening thoughtful gifts we'd bought for each other weeks ago, without acknowledging what they meant. A first edition of his favorite poetry collection from me, a delicate antique pendant in the shape of a key from him. To all the locked doors you've opened for me, he'd said. We called my sister's family and endured good-natured teasing about my sudden unavailability. We made plans for the foundation in Maria's name, sketching out details between coffee and comfortable silence. At sunset, Enzo led me back to the room where Maria's things were kept. He opened the bracelet's case one more time, lifting it carefully. "Will you help me?" he asked. I understood immediately what he meant. Together, we photographed the bracelet from every angle, documented its history, wrote the story of Maria Petrou, 29 years old when she died, mother and wife, beloved and mourned, her memory now transformed into something that would help other families avoid similar loss. "She lives on," I said as we finished. "In this, in you, in the good that will come from her story." Enzo nodded, his eyes bright. "And in whatever children we might have. If..." He hesitated, vulnerable again. "If that's something you'd want?" "Someday." The question hung between us, enormous and impossible and absolutely right. "Someday," I agreed. "When we're ready, when we've built something strong enough to hold them." "You've already built that." He pulled me close. 15 years of building it brick by brick, without either of us acknowledging what we were constructing. He was right. We had been building this all along, a foundation of trust and respect and understanding that could support the weight of love, of partnership, of a future neither of us had dared to imagine until now. As night fell and the city lights began to twinkle below us, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From that first day 15 years ago, when I'd walked into Petro Antiquities looking for a job and found instead a purpose. Through every authentication and acquisition, every tense negotiation and last-minute rescue. Every evening when I'd stayed late just to be near him. Every morning when I'd arrived early for the same reason. All of it leading to this moment. Dimitrios Petrou, called Enzo, the man everyone feared and no one truly knew, holding me close in the home he'd built from grief and determination, wearing vulnerability like an unfamiliar suit he was learning to make comfortable. "What are you thinking?" he murmured against my hair. "That I'd do it all again," I admitted. "Every late night, every impossible task, every moment of wondering if you'd ever see me as more than competent assistants. I'd do it all again to end up exactly here." He pulled back to look at me, his eyes dark with emotion. "My Gemma, always so sure." The possessive came naturally now, no longer a slip, but a claim we both accepted, both wanted. "Not always," I corrected. There were years when I thought this was impossible, when I convinced myself that professional satisfaction was enough, that I didn't need more than the privilege of working beside you. And now? Now I know what I've always known, but was afraid to acknowledge, that I need everything. Your partnership in business and in life, your trust and your vulnerability, your past and your future. I touched the ring on my finger, still marveling at its presence. I need you, Enzo. All of you. Not just the parts you show the world. "You have me," he said simply. "You've had me for longer than either of us was willing to admit." We sealed the promise with a kiss, and in the distance, church bells began to ring, calling the faithful to late Christmas services. The sound drifted through the windows, a benediction over our imperfect, complicated, absolutely right beginning. Later, much later, as we lay in bed watching snow fall against the windows, Enzo spoke into the darkness. "Gemma? Thank you for finding her. For finding us." I threaded my fingers through his, both of us wearing our rings now, visible symbols of invisible bonds. "Thank you for letting me." And in the quiet of Christmas night, surrounded by the ghosts of loss, transformed into the promise of future, we built a new tradition, not of grief endured alone, but of love shared, of wounds acknowledged and tended, of two people who'd spent 15 years circling each other finally coming home. The bracelet of pearls would go to the foundation, would serve the living while honoring the dead. But its truest gift had already been received. The gift of showing Dimitrios Petrou that he was worthy of love, that his loss didn't define him, that someone saw past his armor to the man beneath and chose him anyway. Chose him completely. Chose him forever. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and something sweeter. Kurabietis, I realized with surprise. I padded into the kitchen to find Enzo, still in sleep pants and nothing else, carefully rolling dough and cutting it into crescents. "You're making your mother's cookies," I observed, my voice still rough with sleep. He looked up, flour dusting his hands, a rare smile softening his features. "I found her recipe in her handwriting, preserved in one of the boxes. I thought—" He hesitated, vulnerability flickering across his face. "I thought it was time to stop just remembering and start honoring, to make new memories that include her, rather than avoiding everything that reminds me of loss." I crossed to him, wrapping my arms around his waist from behind, pressing my cheek against the warm skin of his back. "She would love this. Love seeing you happy, seeing you connected to her traditions instead of running from them. I have you to thank for that," he murmured, "for showing me that remembering doesn't have to equal pain." We spent the morning baking together, Enzo teaching me the rhythm of the dough, the precise amount of powdered sugar for coating, the careful timing required for the perfect texture. It was domestic and ordinary and absolutely extraordinary. Dimitrios Petrou, who commanded an empire with ruthless efficiency, patiently explaining cookie techniques with the same focus he applied to authenticating priceless artifacts. "My mother used to say that food was love made visible," he told me as we placed the first batch in the oven. "That when you feed someone something made with your own hands, you're giving them a piece of your heart." "Wise woman," I said softly. "She was." He pulled me close, kissing my forehead. "And she would have loved you. Your strength, your intelligence, the way you don't let me get away with hiding behind walls." The cookies emerged perfect, golden, delicate, sweet with the taste of almonds and tradition. We ate them warm, drinking coffee and watching the city wake up beyond the windows, and I felt the weight of those 15 years of professional distance finally, fully lifting. This was who we were now. Not employer and employee, not even just lovers, but partners building something new from the foundation of everything that had come before. The trust, the respect, the deep knowledge of each other's strengths and weaknesses, all of it transformed into intimacy that went beyond physical, into emotional territory neither of us had navigated before. "I want to take you somewhere," Enzo said suddenly, setting down his coffee. "There's something else I need to show you." Enzo drove us out of the city, heading north along the coastal highway, as morning sunlight turned the frozen landscape into something crystalline and beautiful. I didn't ask where we were going. Had learned over 15 years that sometimes Enzo needed to show rather than tell, needed to control the reveal of information according to his own timeline. After 40 minutes, he turned onto a private road marked only by a discreet brass plaque, Petrou Family Estate. "I didn't know you maintained property outside the city," I said, surprised by this gap in my knowledge. "I don't talk about it." His hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "This was where I grew up, where my mother died. My father kept it after her death, but never lived here again. Couldn't bear it, I think. He used it for storage, for meetings that required privacy. After he died, I considered selling it, but I couldn't quite bring myself to let it go. The house that emerged from the trees was beautiful, a stone villa in the Mediterranean style, clearly built by someone with money and taste, softened by years of weathering into the landscape. Snow covered its terracotta roof and clung to the olive trees that dotted the grounds, creating a scene of such peace that it was hard to imagine it as the site of tragedy. Enzo parked in the circular drive and sat for a moment, staring at the house with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I haven't been inside since the funeral," he admitted quietly. 35 years of avoiding this place because I couldn't separate it from loss. I took his hand, offering silent support, understanding that this was another wall coming down, another piece of armor being carefully removed. "But you brought me here," I said. "Why now?" He turned to look at me, his gray eyes intense. "Because I want to reclaim it, transform it from a monument to grief into something living again. But I can't do it alone, Gemma. I need you beside me for this." We entered together, Enzo unlocking the heavy wooden door with a key that looked ancient, that had probably sat unused in his possession for decades. The interior was frozen in time, furniture covered in dust cloths, paintings dark with age, the scent of decades closed spaces making the air feel thick. But beneath the abandonment, I could see the beauty. High ceilings with exposed beams, stone fireplaces large enough to stand in, windows that would flood the rooms with light once the shutters were opened. A home that had been loved once, that could be loved again. "My mother designed this house," Enzo said, moving through the rooms with the careful steps of someone navigating memory. Every detail, every choice. My father gave her free rein, told her to create her dream. And she did. She created a place that was meant to hold joy, to shelter family, to be filled with laughter and life. I followed him through the villa, watching as he touched surfaces gently, as though greeting old friends. In what had clearly been the kitchen, he paused before a shelf lined with cookbooks, their spines faded but still legible. "Her collection," he murmured, pulling one down carefully. "She loved to cook, to experiment. My father used to joke that he'd married her for her spanakopita." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and I moved closer, offering comfort through proximity. We climbed stairs to the second floor, where bedrooms opened off a central hallway. Enzo stopped before one door, his hand on the knob but not turning it. "This was mine," he said. "The room I was sleeping in when—" He couldn't finish, didn't need to. "Do you want to go in?" I asked gently. He nodded, still not moving. I covered his hand with mine, and together we turned the knob, opened the door. The room was small, clearly a child's space. A bed with a wooden frame carved with ships and stars, shelves lined with toys and books, drawings tacked to the walls, a little boy's artwork, preserved accidentally by abandonment. And on the nightstand, covered in dust but still visible, a photograph of a woman with kind eyes holding a dark-haired boy. Enzo crossed to the photograph, lifted it carefully, wiped the glass with his sleeve. "The last picture of us together," he said, his voice thick. "Taken the week before she died. My father must have left it here. Couldn't bear to pack it away." I studied the image. Maria Petro, so young, radiating the kind of warmth that transcended photography. And little Dmitri, maybe 6 years old, grinning with all the confidence of a child who'd never known real loss, who still believed his mother would always be there. "You have her eyes," I observed softly. "The same kindness in them when you let your guard down." He set the photograph down carefully and pulled me close, burying his face in my hair. I felt his shoulders shake slightly, felt the tears he'd been holding back finally finding release. "I was so angry at her," he confessed, the words muffled against my neck. "For dying, for leaving me. I know that's irrational, that she didn't choose it. But for years, I was furious that she'd abandoned me to my father's coldness, to a world without softness." "That's not irrational," I assured him. "It's human. It's what children do when they lose a parent. We blame them because we're not equipped to understand death, to process that kind of permanence." "I never let myself grieve properly," he continued. "My father didn't allow it, said mourning was weakness. So I learned to bury it, to pretend it didn't matter. And then I spent 35 years becoming exactly what he wanted, hard, controlled, untouchable. But you're not untouchable," I reminded him gently. Not anymore. Not with me. He pulled back to look at me, his eyes red but clear. No, not with you. He cupped my face in his hands. You've undone years of careful armor in 4 days, Gemma. Returned my mother's bracelet, and with it, permission to feel. To remember without only pain. To imagine that maybe I could have what she and my father had in the beginning. Love, partnership, a home filled with warmth instead of emptiness. You can have all of that, I promised. You do have it. We're building it together. We spent hours in that villa, opening shutters to let in winter light, removing dust covers to reveal furniture that had been beautiful once and could be again. Enzo shared memories as they surfaced, his mother reading to him in the library, family dinners in the dining room, lazy summer afternoons in the garden that was now overgrown, but showed hints of the paradise it had been. I want to restore it, he said as we stood in the kitchen, light streaming through newly opened windows. Not as a museum to the past, but as a living space. A home for us, for the family we might build. A way to honor her by filling this place with life again. Yes, I agreed simply, seeing the vision already. Children running through these rooms, laughter echoing where silence had reigned for decades, love replacing loss. We returned to the city as afternoon faded into evening, both of us quiet, processing the emotional weight of the day. But it was a comfortable silence, the kind that came from deep understanding, from knowing that words weren't always necessary. As we pulled into the parking garage of Enzo's building, he turned to me. I need to tell you something. About the business. About the parts I've kept separate from you. My pulse quickened. All right. I've been working with authorities for the past 2 years, he said carefully, providing information about illegal artifact trafficking, helping to repatriate items that were stolen or acquired through coercion. It's part of why I've been so careful about documentation, about maintaining perfect records. I needed to prove which acquisitions were legitimate and which weren't. The revelation didn't shock me as much as it might have. I'd noticed his increased caution, his refusal of certain deals that would have been profitable but ethically questionable. You're cleaning up the empire, I said slowly. I'm trying. He ran a hand through his hair. My father built this business on being willing to acquire anything for the right price. No questions asked. But I don't want that to be my legacy. I want to build something Maria would have been proud of. Something that contributes to preserving history rather than exploiting it. That's why you created the foundation, I realized. Why you've been shifting focus toward conservation and education. He nodded. I can't undo everything my father did, but I can choose a different path going forward. And I want you as full partner in that, Gemma. Not just operationally, but strategically. Your judgment, your ethics, they're what I need to navigate this transformation. The trust implicit in his words. The vulnerability of admitting that he needed guidance, my guidance. It humbled me. I'm honored, and I'm with you, every step of the way. We sealed the promise with a kiss, and I felt the final pieces falling into place. This was what we were building. Not just a romantic relationship, not just a business partnership, but a transformation. Of Enzo, of the empire he'd inherited, of the legacy he would leave. Maria's bracelet had been the key that unlocked all of it. By returning that piece of his past, I'd given him permission to envision a different future. To be vulnerable, to trust, to love without armor. And in doing so, I'd found my own place. Not in the shadows as I'd been for 15 years, but beside him in the light, helping to build something worthy of the woman whose memory we both honored. That evening, as we sat together in Enzo's study, reviewing the preliminary plans for the villa's restoration, my phone rang. Paraskevi Vasilio, calling from Athens. Gemma, her warm rasp greeted me. I heard news through the network. Congratulations on your engagement. I laughed, surprised. How did you... My dear, when Dimitrios Petro starts wearing a matching ring and looking at someone the way witnesses say he looks at you, word travels fast. Her tone softened. I'm happy for you both. Truly. Thank you, Paraskevi. There's another reason I'm calling, she continued. Professional courtesy. There's been inquiries made about you, about your relationship with Petru, about your access to his inventory. Someone is asking questions. Ice trickled down my spine. What kind of questions? The kind that suggests they're building a case. Legal. Continues 6:34 p.m., I think. Not criminal, but thorough. She paused. Watch yourself, Gemma. You're visible now in ways you weren't before. That comes with risks. After the call ended, I shared the information with Enzo, watching his expression darken. It's the transition, he said grimly. As I've pulled back from questionable acquisitions, I've made enemies among people who profited from those arrangements. They're looking for leverage, for ways to damage my credibility or force me back into old patterns. What do? We stay the course. His voice was firm. We maintain perfect records, operate with complete transparency in all legitimate dealings, and refuse to be intimidated back into compromise. He took my hand. But Gemma, this is what I meant about my world being complicated. You're with me now publicly, which makes you a target. If that's too much, stop, I interrupted. I've been your right hand for 15 years. I know exactly what I'm signing up for. And I'm not going anywhere. His relief was palpable. My fierce Gemma. We spent the rest of the evening strategizing, planning not just the villa restoration, but the continued evolution of Petro Antiquities toward complete legitimacy. It was complex work, requiring careful navigation of relationships and commitments. But I'd trained for this my entire career. And now I had Enzo's complete trust, his partnership in every sense. Together we could build something that honored both his mother's memory and the future we were creating. As we worked, snow continued to fall outside, covering the city in white peace. And I thought about how far we'd come in just a few days. From employer and employee maintaining careful distance, to partners in every way that mattered, building a future neither of us had dared imagine until a bracelet of pearls unlocked the possibility. What are you smiling about? Enzo asked, noticing my expression. Us, I admitted. This, how a Christmas gift became a beginning. He pulled me close, kissing me tenderly. Best Christmas I've had in 35 years. Best Christmas I've ever had, I countered. And it was true. For all the Christmases I'd endured with my family, going through motions of celebration while feeling disconnected, separate, none of them compared to this. To being seen completely, loved thoroughly, trusted absolutely. To being home, finally, with the man I'd loved from afar for so long, now loving me back with an intensity that took my breath away. 6 months later, I stood in the restored villa's garden, watching as workers put finishing touches on the landscaping that had transformed overgrown wilderness back into the paradise Maria Petro had designed so many years ago. Olive trees pruned back to health, rose bushes blooming in careful beds, a fountain restored to working order, its gentle splash providing soundtrack to the late spring afternoon. The villa itself glowed golden in the afternoon light, every window open to the warm breeze, every room filled with carefully chosen furniture that honored its history, while making it livable again. We'd preserved Maria's touches, her cookbook collection now displayed in the renovated kitchen, her favorite colors echoed in new upholstery and paint, photographs of her throughout the house, celebrating rather than mourning. It's beautiful. Elena's voice came from behind me. My sister had driven up from the city to see the nearly completed restoration, bringing her children to run through the gardens, as Enzo and I had once imagined our own children might someday do. It is, I agreed, watching my niece and nephew chase each other around the fountain, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. Better than I imagined possible. And the foundation? Elena settled beside me on the garden bench, following my gaze. Launching officially next month. The endowment in Maria's name will fund neurological research in perpetuity. The bracelet is on permanent display at the Children's Hospital Museum, along with her story. Pride warmed my voice. Enzo's been invited to speak at the opening ceremony. Will he? I smiled. He will. Nervously, probably. But he'll do it because it matters. Because her memory deserves to be shared. Elena studied me with the knowing look only sisters can give. You're happy. Really, truly happy. I am. The truth of it still surprised me sometimes. After so many years of settling for professional fulfillment, of convincing myself that was enough. More than I knew I could be. Good. She squeezed my hand. You deserve it, Sophie. All of it. Enzo emerged from the villa, carrying a tray with lemonade and the curabietis we now made together regularly, carrying on Maria's tradition. He'd changed since that Christmas Eve 6 months ago. Still commanded his empire with precision and intelligence, but the hardness had softened, the isolation broken. He smiled more, laughed freely, touched me constantly as though still marveling that he was allowed this intimacy. Your children are destroying my garden, he called to Elena, but his tone was fond, indulgent. Our garden, I corrected automatically, and they're having fun. He set down the tray and dropped a kiss on top of my head, the casual affection still making my heart flutter. Our garden, he agreed. Our home. Our life. Elena made her excuses after refreshments, gathering her children and leaving Enzo and me alone in the golden afternoon. We sat together on the bench, his arm around my shoulders, watching the play of light on the fountain water. I was thinking, Enzo said eventually, about what you said 6 months ago. About children. About building something strong enough to hold them. My pulse quickened. And I think we have. Built something strong, I mean. He turned to face me, his gray eyes serious. This house, the foundation, the work we're doing together at the gallery, it's all part of creating a life that could hold a family, if you're ready, if it's what you want. I thought about the past 6 months, the work we'd done together, the walls we'd demolished and rebuilt, the trust we'd deepened with every challenge faced and overcome. Thought about Enzo learning to be vulnerable, to accept love, to believe he deserved happiness. Thought about myself learning to step out of the shadows, to claim my place beside him, to build rather than just support. I'm ready, I said softly. I want to fill this house with life, with children who'll run through these gardens and learn their grandmother's recipes and grow up knowing they're loved fiercely by parents who chose each other consciously, who built something strong enough to hold them. His smile was radiant, transforming his face. Then let's begin. Let's create the family my mother would have wanted me to have, the one I didn't think I deserved until you showed me otherwise. We sealed the promise with a kiss, and I felt the final piece click into place. This was what we'd been building toward all along, not just partnership or romance or professional success, but a complete life. Love and work intertwined, past and future reconciled, loss transformed into growth. As the sun set over the garden, painting everything in rose and gold, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From that night in the archive room when I'd found a single inventory entry, through 4 desperate days of searching, to Christmas Eve, when I'd placed 18 pearls in Enzo's hands and watched his careful armor finally, fully crack. All of it leading to this. Dimitrios Petrou and Gemma Vasiliou. I'd taken his mother's maiden name as my middle name at our small wedding 2 months ago. Building a future on the foundation of a past we'd both reclaimed. Creating something new from the pieces of what had been lost. Proving that love could survive grief. that vulnerability was strength, that the bravest thing anyone could do was trust another person with their whole heart. "What are you thinking?" Enzo asked, reading the emotion on my face. "That I'd do it all again," I said, echoing words I'd spoken months before. "Every moment of the 15 years before I found the courage to tell you I loved you. Because it led us here, to this exact moment, to this life we're building together." "My Gemma," he murmured, pulling me close. "Thank you for finding me, for refusing to let me hide, for loving me even when I didn't think I was worthy of being loved." "You were always worthy," I corrected gently. "You just needed someone stubborn enough to prove it to you." He laughed, the sound free and joyful. "Stubborn. That's one word for it." "What word would you use?" "Devoted," he said seriously. "Patient, brilliant, brave enough to see past the armor to the man beneath, kind enough to wait until I was ready to let you in." He touched my face tenderly. "Perfect for me in every way that matters." We sat in the garden as evening fell, planning the future, the children we'd have, the family we'd build, the legacy we'd create together. Around us, the villa glowed with warm light, a home reclaimed from grief, transformed into a sanctuary for love. And somewhere, I like to imagine, Maria Petro looked down on her son and smiled, proud of the man he'd become, grateful for the woman who'd helped him find his way back to softness, approving of the family they would build in the home she'd created so long ago. The bracelet of pearls had been the key to all of it. 18 perfect spheres that had unlocked 35 years of grief and revealed the possibility of joy on the other side. By returning what was lost, I'd given Enzo permission to reclaim not just an object, but a part of himself he'd buried, the part that could love and trust and hope. And in doing so, I'd found my own wholeness. After 15 years of hiding in the shadows of his empire, I'd finally stepped into the light as his partner in every sense, building something beautiful from the complicated materials of both our pasts. "I love you," I told him, as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "I love you," he replied, the words still new enough to carry wonder. Today, tomorrow, always, always. The promise Maria had thought she'd have with her son, cut short by tragedy. But Enzo and I, we had always stretching before us, full of possibility, bright with hope. We'd claimed it together, built it consciously, and would protect it fiercely. Our always, our family, our forever. The following week, I stood beside Enzo at the foundation's opening ceremony, watching as he unveiled the display case that held his mother's bracelet. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled the silk covering away, revealing not just the pearls, but the carefully curated exhibition around them. Photographs of Maria, information about aneurysms and neurological research, the story of a life cut short, but a legacy that would continue to save lives. "My mother, Maria Petro, died when I was 7 years old," Enzo began, his voice carrying across the hushed audience. "For 35 years, I avoided speaking her name, avoided feeling the loss, convinced myself that grief was weakness and memory was pain. I watched him, proud beyond words, as he shared her story publicly for the first time. The young woman who'd emigrated from Greece, who'd built a home filled with love, who'd died far too young. The son who'd buried his sorrow and built an empire, learning to be hard because softness seemed dangerous. 6 months ago, my assistant, now my wife." He glanced at me, love evident in his eyes. "Returned to me the bracelet my mother wore every day of her adult life. In doing so, she gave me back more than an object. She gave me permission to remember without only pain, to honor the past while building toward the future." The audience was rapt, silent except for the occasional sniffle as the emotion of his words landed. This foundation, this endowment, this research. It's all in her name. But it's really in the names of everyone who lost someone too soon, to conditions we don't yet fully understand. It's for the children who'll grow up with their mothers because we invested in science and medicine and care. His voice strengthened. Maria Petro deserved more years than she got. But her memory can give others what she was denied: time with the people they love. The applause when he finished was thunderous. I watched families approach him afterward, sharing their own stories of loss and survival, thanking him for creating something that would honor the dead while serving the living. Watched him accept their gratitude with grace, with genuine emotion, no longer hiding behind walls. Later, as we drove back to the villa, he was quiet, processing. "You did beautifully," I told him, my hand covering his on the gear shift. "I was terrified," he admitted, "of falling apart in front of all those people, of doing her memory a disservice." "You honored her perfectly. You showed that her love shaped who you became, that her loss drove you to create something meaningful. That's the best memorial anyone could ask for." He pulled over suddenly, parking in a scenic overlook, and turned to face me. "I need to say something." "All right." "Before you, before the bracelet, before all of this, I was surviving, building, achieving, controlling. But I wasn't living, wasn't feeling, wasn't really here." He touched my face tenderly. "You brought me back to life, Gemma. Made me believe I could have what my parents had in the beginning. Love, partnership, a home. Made me brave enough to try." "You made yourself brave," I corrected. "I just gave you a reason. The best reason." He kissed me softly. "Thank you for everything. For seeing me when I was trying to be invisible. For staying when I gave you 100 reasons to leave. For loving me into being the man I didn't know I could be." "You were always that man," I said, "just buried under years of protection. I just helped you excavate." We sat there as twilight fell, looking out over the landscape that would soon be transformed by summer heat, planning the garden party we'd host in July, talking about the nursery we'd begin preparing in the villa's east wing, building our always, one conversation at a time, one choice at a time, one day at a time. And Maria's pearls, safe in their display case, glowed softly under museum lights, serving their new purpose, reminding everyone who saw them that love survives loss, that memory can fuel action, that even the deepest grief can be transformed into something beautiful and life-giving. The bracelet had come home, and in doing so, it had brought Enzo home to himself, to love, to the possibility of happiness he'd thought forever beyond his reach. Some miracles, I thought, as Enzo started the car, and we drove toward our future. Some miracles are built one pearl at a time, one act of devotion at a time, until suddenly you look back and realize you've created something impossible, something that looks remarkably like love.